Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Frederick Walker Jr., thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited about our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story. And our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today, and then we want to talk about what you're currently doing, and then anything that you're working on for the future, okay?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you for
Appreciate you
having
being
me.
here, man.
Yes, sir.
So where were you born?
I was born in Frankfurt, Germany.
Okay.
My dad was a military
Yeah.
guy. Shortly after I was born, my dad and my mother split.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So just within a couple months or so, of course, I don't remember these things. We moved back to New Orleans, Louisiana, where my mother and father are originally from.
Okay.
So growing up, I have a 5-year-old. I'm sorry, my sister is 5 years older than me.
Mhm.
So looking back, I recognize the elements of the situation being in New Orleans, Louisiana. We moved
What's it
around.
called? What's it
New
called?
Orleans, New Orleans, New
Oh, New
Orleans.
Orleans. Okay. I got
Yes,
you.
New Orleans, Louisiana.
I got
That's
you.
probably the accent.
No, we're good.
So
We're good.
just growing up in New Orleans, Louisiana, parents split. Dad is still in the military for some years after as we're growing. So he's not in the vicinity at the time. And my mother had a superpower. I didn't realize it until I got older, and that superpower was her ability to camouflage our situation,
Yeah.
right? So we grew up financially unstable,
Yeah.
pretty transient. And if you know New Orleans, I think before we hit record, you were speaking of a gentleman that grew up in a murder capital. And New Orleans, I believe in the 90s for sure. And I think even recently, again, hit that murder capital.
Yeah.
And what comes along with the murder capital, of course, is violence,
Mhm.
a lot of guns, a lot of exposure to negative things.
Yeah.
And just growing up in that environment, back to my mother, just that power that she had, that love that she always had, that those things were normal
Yeah.
somewhat,
Yeah.
and the conditions was normal. And
Yeah.
then everybody that's in the neighborhood that you're growing up with, they're living the same way.
Yeah.
So it's all normalized until you get older.
Yeah.
And then you start looking back and saying, well, hey, we never had this.
Mhm.
Well, hey, my mom used to sleep on a couch.
Mhm.
I never realized she didn't have a room at a
Yeah.
point, right? My
Well, you
sister
thought that was normal,
sleep in a room. We
right?
thought that was normal. So
Yeah.
just growing up in that struggle, but not recognizing it until later on was amazing. That's why I just always like to say, because what I notice is when I get into these conversations, we go back and we speak about how parents did,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes it's in a way that would say, well, it was hard. Life was hard and it was crazy and it was wild. And one thing that I'm learning as I mature is that people do the best that they can do
Yeah.
with the information and the resources, whether that's financial or educational resources that they have access to.
Yeah.
So I just would like to say that, for my mother and father, they did the best that they could do.
Yeah.
And as I tell my story, it's with the utmost respect for them at those times. So I'll go back, right, to just growing up in I remember one thing. We lived at one point on Canal Street between McDonald's and Burger King.
Yeah.
So right, nutritionally, it wasn't the
Right.
it wasn't the best. Literally, McDonald's is on the right side and Burger King is on the left.
Yeah.
And of course, this was an everyday thing for us. So now at this point, everybody's talking about McDonald's. Well, we had a lot of it. Right? We would go to McDonald's and get the cup from McDonald's and fill it up at Burger King. And we were just kind of running around as kids, not with much, but with a lot of love.
Yeah.
And as I grew up throughout middle school at a school called McDonald 28, and I'll start there because I just remember so much that was going on at a young age. You know, we had drugs and violence and sexual this was happening in this community. And it was a time of transition in my life because I grew up always feeling like school wasn't difficult, but also it wasn't cool to be smart. Right? So when you get to a certain age, it's like, okay, I know the answer to that, but I'll go ahead and act like I don't. Right? So I was that kid growing up. And at that point, you pick a lane that's best for your survival. And in my teens, when I first started crossing that teenage line, I chose to go with the crowd. Right? I just chose it was a better choice at the time. It was more comfortable. It allowed me to kind of navigate the environment and blend with the norms, right? So you don't stick out like a sore thumb coming up in that type of area. So I blended with the crowd and I learned a lot from the experiences of just growing up in the environment where you got so much drug abuse. So the people that are what you would consider successful at 14, 15-year-old, these are your role models. These guys, they're selling drugs. We call it hustling in New Orleans. You know, they're selling drugs. These are the people that you look up to. So when you're in school and the attorney or the doctor comes speak to the class, well, guess what? We have no connection, right? You don't look like me, talk like me, dress like me. So I don't understand how you got where you are. And that's one of the main reasons why, as I look back to where I am now, I always like to maintain a certain level of cultural competence as well as language, because I realized that was a huge barrier for me as I was growing up. Being able to identify some great role models was just the basic barriers of language, what you look like, how you talk. And then being from New Orleans, the accent, right? It's just like, okay, well, we don't say hello, how are you? We say, what's up? We say, what's happening? What's happening? How you doing? So it's a different language and culture. And as I grew, went through life, I realized that I had a knack for working with young boys. And that was that connection as I got into my field of psychology. And I'm pretty sure we'll go backwards to go forward. But that was my knack to connect with the clients that I began to service in my younger part of my career.
So quick question. We're going to go back just a little bit. Quick question.
Yes.
Who was the most influential person to you growing up?
That's a great question. So I'll start here. Because my mother and father were divorced, there was two different sides of the family, and they were very different, right? Like My mother's side is very cultured and a bit more, less, I would say, traditional, right? So the upbringing was a little less traditional. Everybody kind of off in their own circles. Then we come together sometime as a family. But my father's side was a lot more traditional. This is when Christmas was amazing. The whole family there, everybody opening up presents, etc. Well, I said that to say I had an uncle on my father's side who was from the project, from the same elements that I grew up in. He became a nurse. Then he opened up a hospital. So as a young man looking at that, although I wasn't necessarily thinking about it, there was this influence that I saw, this Black man that talks like me, that has swag and moves in a certain way, and that also has his own background that I'm aware of, that has opened up a hospital. Couldn't understand it, right? Because nobody's around here opening up hospitals. So I think my uncle and what he was able to achieve and the connection that I had with him was a great influence on me being able to just think a bit bigger outside of the box of the options that we tend to have growing up in that type of community.
Yeah, it's
So
amazing.
I would say my Uncle Bruce.
It's amazing how you find somebody like that, right?
Yes.
It's why we do this podcast.
Yes.
So there are going to be people that are going to look at you the way you looked at your uncle.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense.
And that's exactly what we're all about. I mean, like I told you before we hit record, we're in 28 countries. We're worldwide now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Bangladesh. Shout out to Bangladesh. They're our number 2 most popular, like they listen more than they're number 2. United States is number 1, Bangladesh is number 2. Belgium, for whatever reason, is number 3.
Wow.
Ireland's number 4.
Okay.
We're in the top 30.
Wow.
In Ireland ranked podcasts. I don't, figure that out.
That's crazy. And it just shows that how much we're connected.
Yeah. But
so whatever the barriers may be.
People are going to hear your story.
Yes.
Right? And they're going to look at you the way you looked at your uncle. So here's another question for you.
Okay.
Bro, when you were in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Honestly, I wasn't very interested in high school, right? No. I played sports. I wasn't focused, right? I didn't, like I told you before, I was not challenging myself educationally at all. I was just getting by. Whatever I got, I got it. If I passed to the next grade, it was great. My favorite sport was football.
Yeah.
Football. I played football.
What position did you play?
And basketball as well for just a short time. But I played cornerback in football.
Yeah, you did.
Cornerback in football. I always thought that I would be a basketball player until I didn't do well on a basketball team in high school. So I switched over to football. That went great. And it actually landed me a scholarship to a school called Delta State University.
There you go.
And that's where I started to find myself from an educational perspective, because Delta State is a school that versus maybe 90% Caucasian, right? So my first time going to this school, it was a culture shock. I'm from New Orleans. We look around, we only see Black people in my neighborhoods. Yeah. And when I got to Delta State, it was really great because that was the first time that I felt like I would just give myself a shot to see if I could learn this information, return this information, and pass the test, right? Like the other people in the class, right? Yeah. So that is where I started to really like English, and I found myself studying. And I had a roommate. His name was Joe Rush, and that was my first time studying in my life. And I said, Joe, how do I study? He was a couple of years. I'm like, how do I do this? I don't understand. He said, well, look, read the information and then close it and say it to yourself.
Yeah.
So I did that a couple times. I took the test and I got an A. And I was like super excited, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, like I did that, right?
Yeah.
And I just went on and I kept doing it. And I left there with a full scholarship. I ended up going back to Louisiana, but I went to a school called the University of New Orleans.
Yeah.
And I went there on a full scholarship, academic.
Yeah,
First
you
time
did.
in my life. So yeah.
Go Joe Rush.
Yeah, exactly. That's my
Shout
guy.
out to Joe
I would love
Rush.
to give,
If you're out there, Joe, way to go.
Man, understand that. I appreciate you a lot, bro.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's what we do. That's why we do this, right? Because there are people that God puts in our path, right? Joe Rush was the perfect person at the perfect time to help you, and you took off like a rocket ship. To your credit, right? You took advice and you applied it and you took off.
Absolutely.
So you graduated with a degree from Delta State in what?
Well, actually, I left Delta State.
Okay.
So this is the time when Hurricane Katrina hit.
Gotcha.
Right after that. So I left Delta State. I wasn't focused. I was focused in the moments, and I did great in school, but I just wanted to go back home because I went there to play football, and by that point, I was no longer on the team.
I got you.
So I didn't graduate from Delta State. I actually went back to New Orleans, and I ended up graduating from the school called Southern University of New Orleans.
Okay.
And great school, great place for me because they are extremely, it's an open door.
Yeah.
They start with you where you are as far as your growth. And knowing the community that most people come from in New Orleans, you have to understand that they're starting and they're tailoring the education to where we're starting at. And then they kind of pick it up over time. So I graduated from Southern University with psychology, bachelor's degree.
Okay. So why did you pick psychology?
I chose psychology because by that point, that was the subject that I was most intrigued by.
Why is that?
So many things that go on and as we're growing up is based off human behavior. So I was always interested in why people do what they do.
Okay.
Like, why do we do this? And as I took a couple classes, of course, you take your foundational courses. I was extremely intrigued by the different theoretical approaches and the systems theory in specific that speaks to how impactful the environment is on who we become.
Gotcha.
So many times we're not making decisions based off our current thought processes. We're many times making decisions based off information that we received at a young age when we were sponges.
Gotcha.
And then we use that information to make decisions. So I was just extremely intrigued by why do we do what we do, right? Even though it doesn't work sometimes, even though it's not good, even though it's a dead end road, we continue to do it. And there's a reason why. And that's what intrigued me to get into social work.
And that's why we do
psychology. That's why, absolutely.
Right? Because by having people tell us their life story, you can connect the dots.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Your uncle, Joe Rush, stopped me, right? You know what I'm saying? Right? It's like, this is real stuff. And people get an opportunity, like an onion, right? They get an opportunity to peel the layers back, and they get an opportunity to hear how you got to where you are. Well, that's the cool thing about this. So,
That's cool.
So you graduate with a degree in psychology. Then where did you go?
I graduated with my degree in psychology. At the time, I'm also into music and rap music, to be exact. And at this point, I'm off to Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
Right. This is well, the music is going on, right? So
Yeah.
just being a young kid, maybe like 21 years old, 20. Uh, and I will say this, just to back up, just for transparency of the story. I stopped school one semester before I graduated and moved to Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
Then I ended up going back after things didn't go great. So let me just back up because I want to
That's
be
fine.
transparent.
Go
So
ahead.
I ended
Yeah,
up
that's
leaving
fine.
and I went to Atlanta and I was just heavy into the music and just the culture of that. And at that point, that's when I kind of got off track,
Yeah.
not around my family. The entertainment industry tends to be super demanding, especially when you're like really trying to get there,
Yeah.
as well as deal with the pressures of surviving on your own at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So you just don't get any sleep.
Yeah.
You know, you don't get sleep. Uh, drugs are moving around the room, every room you go in,
Mm-hmm.
and I just broke at some point. There
Yeah.
was no one around that knew me well enough to say, "Hey, Fred, you're not looking like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sleeping?" That's why family is so important to have around, and people that know you are very important to have around because they end up being a foundation. And whenever you start slipping, they can kind of bump you back.
Yeah.
So in Atlanta, I ended up just breaking, and mentally, I had some extreme challenges that required me to get some help.
Yeah.
And in the midst of getting that help, I ended up having to relocate back to New Orleans and almost start over from scratch and see, okay, let's try this again.
Mm-hmm.
I have another semester of school,
Yeah.
right? And let me see if now, after I've had that break, let's see if I could do this.
Right.
And I challenged myself again. And I remember my first semester in school, and my mother wasn't happy about me going back because she thought I was just moving too fast.
Yeah.
But that's my personality. I'm like,
Yeah.
just throw me in there and let me figure it out. So I
Right.
went back, and I remember one of my first, and this is another dot that connected, a teacher. I can't remember this teacher's name, but
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.